The tow truck's hydraulic lift slammed into the underside of the black Mercedes at exactly 6:42 in the morning while an HOA compliance officer stood in the rain holding a laminated violation notice that claimed the vehicle had accumulated $3,480 in unauthorized parking fines. The sound of steel chains rattling across the pavement echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac of Willow Creek Estates as neighbors cracked open blinds and stared from dark kitchen windows. "Sir, you can't park here without a resident permit," the compliance officer barked while pointing toward a faded sign near the curb. The homeowner, Marcus Reed, stood barefoot in his driveway holding a coffee mug that had started shaking in his hand. The car being hooked onto the truck wasn't parked in front of someone else's home. It wasn't blocking traffic. It was sitting inside the private parking section directly behind his own townhouse. And that was the problem. Because Marcus wasn't angry yet. He looked confused. The tow operator hesitated for half a second when Marcus calmly asked one question. "You're sure the HOA authorized this tow?" The compliance officer smirked and tapped the clipboard. "Personally approved by the board president." The hydraulic wind screamed louder as the Mercedes lifted another 6 inches off the pavement. Then Marcus slowly pulled his phone from his pocket, looked at the parking lot, then quietly said something that made the tow driver stop moving entirely. "You may want to put that car back down before your insurance company sees the deed." The compliance officer laughed. But the tow driver didn't. And by the time police arrived 20 minutes later, the HOA board president was already racing toward the neighborhood clubhouse in a panic after discovering a document she never expected anyone to read. Marcus Reed had lived in Willow Creek Estates for nearly 11 years, and during that time, he had built a reputation as one of the most dependable homeowners in the entire neighborhood. He paid his HOA dues ahead of schedule, kept his townhouse in immaculate condition, and rarely missed community meetings. Every Saturday morning, neighbors would see him trimming hedges, pressure washing his driveway, or carefully polishing one of the classic cars he restored as a hobby. He wasn't the type of resident who caused problems. In fact, most people considered him the exact kind of homeowner an HOA should appreciate. But Willow Creek Estates wasn't the same community it had been when Marcus first moved in. Over the previous 2 years, the association had undergone a dramatic transformation after a new board took control. What had once been a relaxed suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of a growing Arizona city slowly became a place where residents felt they were being watched constantly. The atmosphere changed. Friendly reminders turned into official warnings. Small issues became expensive violations. At the center of it all was HOA President Denise Holbrook. Denise ran every board meeting with an iron grip. Homeowners who questioned policies often found themselves interrupted, dismissed, or buried under complicated procedural language. New rules appeared so frequently that many residents struggled to keep up. One month it was restrictions on outdoor decorations. The next month it was regulations about parking permits, lawn ornaments, and even the color of front door wreaths. Residents received fines for leaving trash bins visible for a few extra hours. Families were cited because children's bicycles were left on driveways overnight. One homeowner received a warning because holiday lights remained hanging a week longer than the HOA preferred. People complained privately. Almost nobody challenged Denise publicly. The parking lot behind Marcus's townhouse eventually became the board's favorite enforcement target. Every evening, a security patrol slowly cruised through the area with flashlights. The metallic clank of wheel boots being attached to vehicles became increasingly common. Bright orange warning stickers appeared on windshields with alarming regularity. Residents returning home after work often discovered notices tucked beneath their wipers, threatening fines or towing if violations weren't corrected immediately. The smell of hot asphalt lingered in the Arizona heat while homeowners nervously checked their vehicles each morning, wondering whether they had unknowingly violated another rule. Marcus tried to stay out of the conflict. At first, whenever concerns arose, he approached them professionally. He attended meetings, asked reasonable questions, and requested copies of policies before forming opinions. Unlike many residents, he never shouted or argued. That was exactly what frustrated Denise. Because Marcus had spent years working as a commercial property consultant. Reading contracts, analyzing land agreements, and identifying legal inconsistencies were second nature to him. While most homeowners simply accepted what the HOA told them, Marcus preferred verifying things himself. 6 months before the towing incident, he noticed something unusual while reviewing a routine HOA budget report. Buried deep inside the financial documents was a category showing revenue generated from parking enforcement. At first glance, it seemed normal. Then he noticed the parcel numbers. Not parking space numbers. Parcel numbers. The distinction immediately caught his attention. Something didn't add up. Marcus initially assumed it was a clerical error. But the more documents he reviewed, the more questions emerged. Soon afterward, certified letters began arriving at his front door. Thick cream-colored envelopes stamped with bright red warnings. Final notice. Unauthorized vehicle storage. Intent to tow. Each notice referenced the same parcel identifiers that had appeared in the budget reports. And with every letter, Marcus became more certain that the HOA was enforcing authority over property it might not actually own. The board thought they were dealing with another homeowner who would eventually pay the fines and stay quiet. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had already started digging into county records. And what he was about to uncover would threaten everything the HOA believed it controlled. 3 days before the tow truck arrived, the conflict between Marcus Reed and the Willow Creek Estates HOA took a dramatic turn. Marcus returned home shortly after dinner and immediately noticed something unusual. The evening sun was setting behind the row of townhouses, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Children were riding bicycles along the sidewalks, and the smell of burgers cooking on backyard grills drifted through the warm Arizona air. Then he saw it. A bright orange wheel boot clamped tightly around the front tire of his black Mercedes. For a moment, Marcus simply stared at it. The boot looked almost ridiculous sitting there in the private parking area behind his own townhouse. Attached to the driver's side window was a large fluorescent violation sticker that stretched across the glass like crime scene tape. The words printed across the sticker were impossible to miss. Unauthorized use of HOA property. Marcus let out a slow breath. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Several nearby residents had already noticed the scene. A few stood on their patios pretending not to watch. Others peeked through windows while quietly discussing what had happened. Near the entrance to the parking lot, a neighborhood security guard leaned against a golf cart, trying very hard to look uninterested. Marcus walked calmly toward the vehicle. "You know this is my assigned parking area, right?" he asked. The guard shrugged without meeting his eyes. "Board orders." Marcus crouched beside the tire and examined the boot carefully. "Did anyone verify ownership records before installing this?" The guard shifted uncomfortably. "I just follow instructions." That answer told Marcus more than the guard realized. People usually become defensive when they're confident they're right. This man looked nervous. Marcus stood and pointed toward a recently installed parking sign near the entrance. That sign wasn't approved during the last association vote. The guard glanced at it briefly before looking away. Again, no answer. Another clue. The HOA wasn't simply enforcing existing rules anymore. They were creating new ones whenever it suited them. The following morning brought an even bigger surprise. Just after sunrise, Marcus heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, Denise Holbrook stood outside holding a thick stack of documents. The pile was so large it resembled a legal textbook more than a collection of violation notices. Several neighbors immediately slowed their morning walks to watch. Denise clearly wanted an audience. "Mr. Reed," she announced loudly, "you currently owe $4,200 in outstanding violations, penalties, administrative costs, and enforcement fees." She handed him the paperwork. Marcus flipped through the pages one at a time. The deeper he looked, the stranger the charges became. There were duplicate fines listed on multiple dates. Administrative processing fees appeared several times. Daily non-compliance penalties accumulated at astonishing rates. Then Marcus found a charge that actually made him smile. Hostile homeowner review, $200. He looked up. "You charged me $200 for hostility." Denise crossed her arms. "Your behavior during board meetings has been disruptive." Marcus laughed softly. "I asked questions. You challenged board decisions. That's called participating." Denise's expression hardened. For several seconds, neither said anything. Then Marcus turned another page and found the information he had been looking for. The parcel references. The same numbers appeared again and again throughout the violation package. Slowly, he closed the stack of papers. "One question," he said calmly. "Who approved these parcel boundaries?" For the first time, Denise hesitated. Only for a second. But Marcus noticed. Her confidence flickered. A tiny crack had appeared. What Denise didn't know was that Marcus had already spent the previous week requesting documents from the county recorder's office. And that morning, while she was busy delivering threats, a package containing those records had finally arrived. Inside were documents that would soon turn the entire HOA's parking enforcement operation upside down. The towing operation began before most residents had even finished their first cup of coffee. At exactly 6:12 a.m., the quiet streets of Willow Creek Estates were flooded with flashing amber lights as two tow trucks rolled slowly through the neighborhood entrance. Their warning beacons reflected off garage doors, parked vehicles, and rain-soaked pavement, creating an atmosphere that felt less like routine enforcement and more like a public spectacle. The low rumble of diesel engines echoed through the sleeping community. Porch lights flickered on. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. Residents stepped outside in slippers and robes, coffee mugs in hand, trying to understand what was happening so early in the morning. One tow truck positioned itself near the visitor parking section. The second drove directly toward the lot behind Marcus Reed's townhouse. That detail immediately caught everyone's attention. This wasn't random enforcement. This was targeted. Within minutes, word spread across the neighborhood. "They are finally towing Marcus's car. Denise actually did it. Can they even do that?" Small groups of homeowners gathered quietly along sidewalks and driveways. Some watched from porches while others stood near mailboxes pretending they had simply come outside for fresh air. Everyone knew something unusual was happening. Meanwhile, HOA President Denise Holbrook arrived with several board members trailing behind her. Each carried clipboards filled with paperwork. They walked through the parking area with an air of authority, speaking quietly among themselves while occasionally glancing toward Marcus's townhouse. One board member had apparently decided to look intimidating by wearing aviator sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. The effect lasted less than a minute. While attempting to stride confidently across the parking lot, he accidentally stepped directly into an active sprinkler head. Water sprayed across his pants and shoes. Several residents immediately turned away to hide their laughter. Even Marcus, watching from his driveway, couldn't suppress a small smile. The moment briefly lightened the tension. Briefly. Because Denise clearly intended to make an example out of him. As more residents gathered, she stepped forward and raised her voice so everyone could hear. If this vehicle is not removed voluntarily, she announced, pointing toward the Mercedes, the association will begin foreclosure proceedings related to unpaid assessments and enforcement penalties. The reaction was immediate. Several neighbors gasped. Others exchanged stunned looks. Foreclosure. Overparking violations. Even residents who normally supported the HOA appeared uncomfortable. The threat sounded extreme. Because legally, it was dangerously close to being exactly that. Marcus remained calm. Holding a slim brown folder beneath one arm, he slowly stepped forward until he stood a few feet from Denise. "You are threatening foreclosure based on disputed parking enforcement?" he asked evenly. Denise nodded without hesitation. "The association has authority over all common-use parking parcels within Willow Creek Estates." Marcus stared at her for a moment. Then he glanced down at the brown folder. The folder contained documents Denise had never seen. Documents that could change everything. When he looked back up, his expression remained calm. "You may want to rethink that statement," he said quietly. Denise dismissed the warning with a wave of her hand. She believed she was in complete control. The crowd watched silently as the tow operator prepared the truck. Steel chains rattled. Hydraulic equipment hissed. The lift arm slid beneath the Mercedes. A loud metallic groan echoed through the parking lot as the vehicle slowly began rising off the pavement. Neighbors held their breath. Denise stood confidently with her clipboard. Board members watched proudly. And at that exact moment, with the Mercedes suspended inches above the ground and dozens of eyes fixed on him, Marcus finally opened the brown folder. What happened next would turn the entire morning upside down. As the Mercedes hung partially suspended above the pavement, the entire parking lot fell into an uneasy silence. The hydraulic lift emitted a low mechanical hum while steel chains stretched tight beneath the vehicle. Rain drizzled lightly across Willow Creek Estates, leaving small droplets on windshields and soaking the edges of the documents Marcus read carefully removed from his brown folder. Dozens of residents watched from sidewalks and driveways. Nobody spoke. Even the tow operator seemed distracted now. Marcus walked toward a nearby pickup truck parked along the curb and spread several documents across its hood. The papers looked old, their edges slightly yellowed from years of storage. Some contained survey maps. Others displayed legal descriptions, parcel boundaries, and county recording stamps. The scent of wet paper mixed with the smell of rain and asphalt. Most homeowners couldn't understand what they were looking at. But Marcus could. And so could anyone familiar with property law. One particular document sat at the top of the stack. Parcel transfer agreement, recorded prior to HOA incorporation. Marcus placed his hand on the document and looked toward Denise. For months, he had suspected something wasn't right. The first clue appeared nearly 6 months earlier while reviewing HOA financial reports. At the time, he had noticed parking enforcement revenue connected to parcel numbers that didn't match the association's master property records. The inconsistency bothered him. So he started investigating. At first, he assumed it was nothing more than a bookkeeping mistake. Then he requested county records. Then survey maps. Then historical development filings. Each document revealed another piece of the puzzle. And eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. Years before Willow Creek Estates officially became an HOA community, the original developer experienced financial difficulties during construction. To secure funding, several portions of the project were separated and transferred into different ownership structures. One of those parcels included the parking lot now sitting directly behind Marcus's townhouse. The lot everyone assumed belonged to the HOA. The lot generating thousands of dollars in enforcement revenue. The lot Denise claimed was association property. It wasn't. Marcus pointed to a series of ownership records. These filings show the parcel was transferred to a private holding company before the HOA was ever created. Several residents moved closer. Even Denise stepped forward. Marcus continued. The holding company later dissolved during restructuring proceedings. He flipped to another document. When that happened, ownership rights were transferred to surviving stakeholders. A homeowner near the crowd frowned. What does that mean? Marcus looked up. It means the property didn't transfer to the HOA. The parking lot became completely silent. Then Marcus revealed the final piece. Years earlier, long before moving into Willow Creek as a resident, he had invested in portions of the original development project. During the housing market collapse, several unsold commercial interests were distributed among investors as part of settlement agreements. One of those interests included ownership rights connected to the parking parcel. Rights that eventually transferred directly to him. Not by accident. Not through a loophole. Legally. Properly. Recorded with the county. For years, Marcus never paid much attention to it. The parcel generated little value and caused no problems. Until the HOA started using it as a weapon against homeowners. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a brief pause, he spoke calmly. Yes, this is Marcus Reed. His eyes shifted toward the suspended Mercedes. I think now would be a good time to send over the updated title verification. The tow operator overheard enough of the conversation to become visibly uncomfortable. His confident posture disappeared almost instantly. He looked at the documents. Then at the vehicle hanging above the pavement. Then at Denise. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared on every face around the parking lot. And Denise still hadn't realized how close the entire operation was to collapsing. The atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates changed dramatically over the next 20 minutes. What had started as a routine HOA towing operation was quickly becoming something far more serious. The rain continued falling lightly as residents remained gathered around the parking lot, unwilling to leave. News of the confrontation had spread throughout the neighborhood, and more homeowners arrived every few minutes. Some stood beneath umbrellas. Others watched from garage entrances or covered porches. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something important. At 7:04 a.m., the county deputy's vehicle pulled into the parking area. The crowd immediately grew quiet. A few moments later, another SUV arrived carrying a representative from the towing company's legal department. Judging by his tired expression and hastily buttoned shirt, he had clearly been called out of bed on very short notice. Marcus calmly approached them with his folder. Without raising his voice, he handed over copies of the county records, survey maps, and ownership documents he had gathered during his investigation. The deputy spent several minutes reviewing the paperwork carefully. Page after page. Map after map. Meanwhile, Denise stood nearby growing increasingly impatient. This is ridiculous, she said. The association has managed that parking area for years. The deputy adjusted his glasses and continued reading. Finally, he looked up. These records indicate private ownership. Denise immediately shook her head. That's impossible. The deputy didn't argue. He simply tapped the documents. I'm only telling you what the county records show. Several homeowners exchanged nervous glances. For the first time, Denise looked uncertain. Marcus remained calm. He walked toward the tow truck and addressed the operator directly. You're currently removing a vehicle from land that I legally own, he said. The authority being used to justify this tow is now under dispute. The operator swallowed hard. Marcus continued. So I'm asking respectfully, put the vehicle back down. The driver didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward Denise. Denise looked toward the deputy. The deputy deliberately remained silent. That silence carried enormous weight. No one was willing to guarantee the HOA was right anymore. The tow operator shifted nervously in his seat. His confidence was disappearing fast. Then Denise made the biggest mistake of the morning. Determined to maintain control, she pointed toward the truck and gave a direct order. Continue the tow. The operator hesitated. But after several uncomfortable seconds, he reluctantly activated the controls. The hydraulic system groaned. The Mercedes lifted another inch. Marcus slowly raised his phone. Perfect, he said calmly. Please keep going. Denise frowned. Are you recording this? Marcus shook his head. No. He paused. Then added the sentence that instantly changed everything. My attorney is. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped. Several neighbors stared at Denise. The towing company representative's face tightened with concern. The tow operator immediately shut off the truck's engine. Even the neighborhood security guard quietly stepped backward, putting more distance between himself and the unfolding disaster. The parking lot had become completely silent. For the first time all morning, people weren't looking at Marcus. They were looking at Denise. Because everyone was beginning to realize the same thing. If Marcus's documents were legitimate, the HOA wasn't enforcing rules anymore. It was creating legal liability. And the consequences were about to become much bigger than a parking dispute. At exactly 8:03 a.m., just when most residents thought the situation couldn't become any more dramatic, a Silver County-issued SUV rolled slowly into Willow Creek Estates. Every head in the parking lot turned toward it. The vehicle stopped near the tow trucks, and 3 officials stepped out carrying clipboards, tablets, and a large rolled-up set of maps. Unlike the HOA board members, they weren't trying to look important. They didn't need to. These were county zoning officials. And their arrival instantly changed the balance of power. The crowd parted as the officials walked directly toward the center of the dispute. One of them unrolled a large GIS parcel map across the hood of a vehicle and began comparing it to the documents Marcus had provided earlier. Denise watched nervously. For the first time that morning, she wasn't speaking. The lead zoning officer studied the records for several moments before looking directly at her. His question was simple. But it landed like a hammer. Can you explain why your association has been collecting parking enforcement revenue on privately owned commercial property? The entire parking lot went silent. Denise opened her mouth to respond. Nothing came out. The official continued reviewing the records. According to county filings, the parking parcel had never been transferred into HOA ownership. The land remained privately held, meaning the association had no authority to issue parking fines, authorize towing actions, or threaten enforcement penalties related to its use. Several homeowners stared at each other in disbelief. Many of them had paid fines over the years. Some had even been threatened with towing. Now they were learning that the HOA might never have had legal authority to do any of it. The zoning officer wasn't finished. Financial reports provided by Marcus showed years of parking-related revenue included in association budgets. Fine collections, towing fees, administrative penalties, and enforcement charges had all been recorded as HOA income. That revelation created an even bigger problem. If the association collected money from activities it wasn't legally authorized to conduct, homeowners could begin questioning years of financial reporting and board decisions. One HOA board member slowly lowered his clipboard. Another sat down on a nearby cab and buried his face in his hands. The confidence that had existed earlier that morning was completely gone. Then Marcus revealed the final piece of information. 2 months earlier, he had formally notified the HOA that the parcel ownership records appeared incorrect and demanded the board stop enforcing parking regulations on the property until the matter was verified. The board ignored him. They assumed he was bluffing. They assumed he would eventually give up. Instead, he spent those 2 months gathering evidence. Now county officials were asking difficult questions in front of dozens of witnesses. The irony was almost unbelievable. For nearly 3 years, the HOA had been aggressively enforcing parking rules on land it didn't own. And the legal owner had been sitting quietly in HOA meetings the entire time, watching them do it. The realization hit the crowd all at once. This was no longer a dispute about a parked car. It was a scandal. That evening, the Willow Creek clubhouse was more crowded than anyone could remember. Every chair was occupied. Homeowners lined the walls, stood in doorways, and filled every available corner of the meeting room. Conversations buzzed through the air as residents discussed the shocking events from earlier that morning. The atmosphere felt tense. Almost electric. At the front of the room, Denise Holbrook sat beside the remaining board members. Stacks of documents covered the table in front of them. The confidence they usually displayed during meetings was nowhere to be seen. When Marcus Reed entered carrying his familiar brown folder, the room immediately grew quiet. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody dismissed his concerns. For the first time, everyone wanted to hear what he had to say. Marcus walked to the front table and calmly placed several certified county documents on the surface. The papers slid across the table until they stopped directly in front of Denise. "You threatened foreclosure," Marcus said evenly, his voice carrying throughout the room. "You threatened residents with legal action on property the association doesn't own." Denise stared at the documents. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she attempted one final defense. "The association has maintained that parking lot for years." Marcus nodded. "I don't disagree." He paused briefly. "But maintenance doesn't create ownership." The room fell silent. Several homeowners exchanged glances. Everyone knew he was right. Marcus then opened another folder and removed a detailed financial spreadsheet. He placed it on the table for everyone to see. "You collected more than $80,000 in parking-related fines, penalties, towing fees, and enforcement charges connected to that parcel." A board member leaned forward. "That can't be accurate." Marcus calmly pointed to the records. "It is." The board member looked down at the numbers and said nothing further. The reality of the situation had become impossible to deny. Finally, Denise looked up. Her voice was noticeably quieter than before. "What do you want?" Marcus folded his hands. "I want every improper fine reversed. Every towing fee refunded. And I want this board to stop threatening homeowners with authority it doesn't legally possess." No one argued. No one objected. For the first time all day, the entire room understood exactly who was standing on solid ground. The fallout from the parking lot scandal moved through Willow Creek Estates faster than anyone expected. Within days, homeowners were demanding answers. Special meetings were scheduled, financial records were reviewed, and residents who had remained silent for years suddenly began asking difficult questions about the board's actions. The HOA's legal counsel resigned fast. 2 board members stepped down shortly afterward, recognizing that public confidence in the board had completely collapsed. Facing overwhelming pressure from homeowners, Denise Holbrook eventually announced her resignation during a packed community meeting. Independent auditors were brought in to examine the association's finances. Their review uncovered years of parking-related fines, towing fees, and enforcement charges connected to the disputed parcel. More than $92,000 in potential reimbursements were identified, and formal notices were sent to affected residents explaining that prior enforcement actions were being suspended pending legal review. The towing company also moved quickly to resolve possible liability issues before lawsuits could develop. Meanwhile, Marcus chose a different path than many expected. Instead of pursuing a massive legal battle, he negotiated a long-term agreement allowing residents to continue using the parking lot while permanently removing HOA enforcement authority over the property. The result transformed the neighborhood. The constant threats disappeared. The orange warning stickers vanished. Neighbors started talking to one another again. For the first time in years, Willow Creek Estates felt less like a battlefield and more like a community. The story of Willow Creek Estates became a powerful reminder that authority only matters when it is backed by actual legal rights. For years, residents assumed the HOA knew exactly what it was doing. Most homeowners never questioned the parking rules, the warning notices, or the growing list of fines because they believed the board had already verified everything. After all, why would an association enforce rules on property it didn't legally control? The answer surprised everyone. Sometimes organizations become so comfortable exercising authority that they stop verifying whether that authority actually exists. That was exactly what happened here. One overlooked property document, buried inside county records for years, completely changed the outcome of a dispute that began with a simple parking violation. The HOA believed it controlled the parking lot. The board acted as if ownership was unquestionable. Residents accepted the enforcement because they assumed someone had already done the legal homework. Nobody bothered to check. Except Marcus. By taking the time to read parcel records, ownership filings, and land transfer agreements, he uncovered information that shifted the balance of power throughout the entire neighborhood. What started as an attempted vehicle tow ultimately exposed years of improper enforcement actions, thousands of dollars in questionable fines, and a misunderstanding of property rights that affected hundreds of residents. The lesson extends far beyond one HOA. Whether dealing with a homeowners association, a local government agency, a property management company, or even a private business, understanding the documents behind the decisions can be just as important as understanding the decisions themselves. Rules matter. Contracts matter. Property records matter. And sometimes a single overlooked paragraph can completely change a situation that appears settled. In the end, Marcus didn't win because he shouted louder than everyone else. He won because he had the facts. He understood the documents. And when the moment arrived, he was prepared to prove it. Stories like this happen more often than many people realize. Across the country, homeowners regularly face disputes involving parking rights, property boundaries, enforcement actions, and questions about legal authority. So now I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever seen an HOA, landlord, property manager, or local organization try to enforce a rule that they probably didn't have the authority to enforce? What happened? And if you were in Marcus's position, would you have handled the situation the same way, or would you have taken the HOA to court? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more HOA dramas, property disputes, neighborhood conflicts, and real-world stories where accountability finally catches up with people who think nobody will ever question their authority.